Welcome everybody to our next public meeting. I've got no apologies. Any declarations of interest? Steve.
I'm Vice Chair of Newlon Housing Trust. Vice Chair of Newlon Housing Trust, who are a registered social housing provider regulated by the CQC. And in relation to the Winterbourne View legal case, my wife is a member of Liberty Council, and if those discussions occur, I will withdraw from the meeting.
Shall I start again? This is Amanda and Louise's last public meeting, so on behalf of all the board, thank you very much for all the work you've done. I know it's been incredibly tough, and setting up a new regulatory system is incredibly difficult, but there's a lot that we can learn from what you've done over the last few years, and we will build on in the future. So can I wish you both the very best with what you do next? Thank you. And it's Paul's first meeting, Paul Bate. His first meeting, taking over Director of Strategy, and he's going to have a big input into the consultation document that's going to be published in June. The minutes of the last meeting. Is everyone happy with the minutes of the last meeting? Matters arising. I think there are three I've been asked to mention. A paper has been circulated explaining the use of Section 36 powers under the Freedom of Information Act. An action on predictive metrics has been superseded by the work now ongoing on the development of the new strategy. And Anna has circulated a note on Health Watch England's response to Francis, but I think you'll pick that up in the main part of the meeting, Anna.
There are two things I wanted to raise.
Yeah.
One on page 2, number 9, the response to the Health Select Committee report on CQC. It was just a sort of update. I mean, I did ask to have some input, but obviously that didn't happen. But also, I'm aware that the response has actually been published, and I'm not sure that the board were made aware of that. So it would be useful, in future that the board, is at least informed that a response has been sent, because I picked it up via Twitter, to be honest. So, yeah, thanks.
Chair, I think that sits with me. I'll make sure that the board are advised on any further reporting to the Select Committee. I apologise, Kay, if I didn't pick this minute up. I think we have picked up on the issue of culture, and I hope it's adequately dealt with. So if there's any offence, my apologies.
Yeah, okay. I mean, obviously, I think it would be good if we could be sent a copy of the response that we submitted to the committee, please. Yeah. The other thing is on number 18. You said that we were going to meet. The board was going to have a meeting with Robert Francis. In either June or July, and I just wondered if a date has been set.
Yeah. He's coming to the board meeting. Which board meeting is he coming to, Claire? Is it the July meeting? Yeah. I thought actually we might try and schedule an away day at the back end of July to go through the strategy and the consultation process in more detail as well. So I've asked Alice to ring round on dates for them. And we'll have the new members of the board will be here by then as well. Thank you, Kay. So, Chief Executive's report, David.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is in three parts. First, looking at the issues around strategy delivery. Secondly, on performance, and then thirdly on others. Sorry, 4 parts, and then a final update on staffing, which I think you might already have covered, David. So on the strategy first, the strategy was published in April. Following extensive engagement, it clarifies our purpose, sets the context for the work that we will do in 2013-14 in the business plan, and we're now busy building the delivery programme, which will allow, I hope, the board and others to take some confidence in the way that we actually move forward. That strategy forms the basis of our narrative about the development of CQC, and we'll continue to bring forward plans as we move through the delivery. This feeds into the second item, which is a consultation document. We've committed to publish a consultation document on the 17th of June, and that document will set out the overarching changes that we'll make to our regulatory framework, our operating model, if you wish, over the activity we undertake in relation to the NHS, adult social care and primary medical services. And specifically, part 2 of the document will set out the changes that we are proposing to make in the way that we inspect hospitals during 2013-14. So it will touch on the introduction of chief inspectors, the change to the inspection regime, the development of ratings, and also how they relate to a failure regime. Critically, our approach will be answering the 5 questions as to whether a service is safe, whether it's effective, whether it's caring, whether it's responsive, and whether it's well led. The purpose of the consultation document is to ensure that we can engage with clinicians, people that use services, patients, carers, as well as other professional and executive groups. The consultation will be for an 8-week period, and that will then inform a consultation later in the summer into the autumn around the changes that we actually need to that need to be made to regulations and the changes that we will need to make to support those regulations. So work is going on at some pace to ensure that we're prepared for that consultation document being published in June. An important document from our point of view, because it'll be the first time we've really set out in some detail the changes that we anticipate making. I've touched on the care bill because that went into Parliament and on its first reading on the 9th of May. Second reading was at the beginning of this week. There is content in the care bill which has direct relevance for us. It changes the requirement to have warning notices before we take any action in relation to NHS Trust. It introduces the market oversight responsibilities that we're being asked to undertake, and also it sees the introduction of a unitary board. So that bill will go through the parliamentary process and sets the legal context and framework within which we operate. Single failure regime, I've touched on already, but is a separate note at paragraph 4, is a single time limited failure regime, which is really wanting to change the way that the failure regime is delivered within the NHS so that there's a clearer, simpler, more understandable system for failure, which has a single regime. It will require us to identify where there are concerns and then work with Monitor and the Trust Development Authority to ensure the appropriate action is taken. We'll then assess again whether that action is satisfactory, and then through the Chief Inspector indicate whether any further intervention is required, and ultimately that could lead to an organisation going in the failure regime with all the consequences that could come from that in terms of the future of a particular service. So a very important aspect of our future responsibilities and the way we'll work with Monitor and the Trust Development Authority. One can anticipate this will be quite vigorously debated as it goes through the parliamentary process, just because of the issues that are at stake. Market oversight, the government asked us to take some responsibility for overseeing the market in adult social care. This is really driven by the events a couple of years ago in relation to the market failure of Southern Cross. And what we're asked to do is monitor the large corporate providers to ensure that they've got sustainability plans in place in case of any future failure, that the issues around continuity of care for the residents of homes or the users of service can actually be built in to the way that providers operate, but also the way that we operate. We can build this work into the partnership agreement we've got with Oxford Brookes University at the present time. It'll be a requirement that will come onto the statute from April 2015, so there is time for us to develop this without compromising any of the priorities that we've set out for development in 13-14. On performance,
Can I ask a question on
yeah.
that, David?
Yeah.
This work with Oxford Brookes, I mean, a sustainability plan, as I understand it, is a living will, really. So
Yeah.
that they plan, in the event of failure, there is a plan B in order to maintain services over that time. And Oxford Brookes are doing, how are they contributing to it?
So the relationship we have with Oxford Brookes is that they've been undertaking, in effect, some quite sophisticated analytical work about patterns and trends in the adult social care market, people coming in, people going out, and actually monitoring not just change activity within the adult social care sector, but also an analysis of why those changes will be taking place. So it's not just on regulatory activity, it's also looking at financial markets and what the financial markets are doing, so it's a monitoring activity. So that activity can help inform our work, but ultimately, you're right, David, this will be a living will, and what are the things that we need to ensure is that we're monitoring those 50 or 60 large corporate providers that operate at a national level, where if any change took place to their sustainability, it may well impact on the continuity of care. So I don't think our job is to intervene where there is failure to stop something failing, but it is to ensure that there is continuity of care for residents of those services. And that is the work that we will have to do. The Oxford Brookes work at the minute is actually providing the intelligence and informing it. So we're in active discussions about that. I think we will need to take on either a different skill set into CQC, or we'll have to look at whether we can actually contract with another organisation that has that skill set. This is much more about business continuity and business failure regimes, and it is about economic or statistical monitoring of activity within the service. So we'll scope that work over this next period, and that's how I'd say the difference between Oxford Brookes and the work that we need to do.
You said it was the sort of 50 or so large providers, because there's a sort of whole spectrum from sort of single homes to corporate providers that are large, medium and small. So, but it seems to me that even if it was a single home, that would still impact, it'd only impact on a few people, but it would still impact on the quality of care for those people in the single home. I mean, is it just because of the scale of a larger provider? Because, you know, if you're applying the principles, they would apply to smaller providers as well, frankly.
I think that's absolutely right, Kay. For the past 25 years, there's been market entry and exit by care providers quite successfully. The issue about Southern Cross was the scale of it and the degree of market domination that they got in a number of areas of the country, particularly the northeast of England. And local authorities have successfully managed market entry and exit for those 25 years, and continuity of care has been provided to those individuals quite successfully. And indeed, where you've got operators that own 2 or 3 homes, even if they go across more than 1 or 2 local authorities, they've normally been very successfully managed in terms of market entry and exit. The challenge that Southern Cross brought forward was one that impacted on virtually every region and on the vast majority, but not all, local authorities. And in some places, I think in some local authorities in the northeast of England, they provided over 30% of the beds. And therefore, there was an issue that came from the Public Accounts Committee about market domination. The OFT currently set that at 40%, interestingly enough. But nevertheless, if those services had failed in terms of continuity, there would have been serious repercussions in each of those local authorities. So what was required at a regional and at a national level is local authorities working together to ensure there was continuity. I think that's what the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services provided, and I think our role in that context is to ensure that there are continuity plans in place from the provider side, not straying into what local authorities need to do as in terms of their responsibilities to the population, but making sure that happens. 50 to 60 is a figure based on the Department of Health's analysis. We need to work that through and see whether that's going to stack up as we move forward and we work these plans up in anger. My feeling it's at the top end rather than at the bottom end of this, but let's do the work and find out.
Okay. See it?
Yes, I don't really understand how this is going to work with in relation to the financial sensitivity of any organisation being told we're not really confident in your ability to survive. So if they're publicly quoted companies, which some of them will be part of, this information is going to be very sensitive to their share price. If they're not publicly quoted, it will certainly affect their credit rating, and it could almost become self-fulfilling. If the credit rating goes down, a loan gets withdrawn, and they go bust. You know, have we thought this completely through? I mean, I'm sure someone has, but I'm concerned.
We're not trying to predict the ones that are going to fail. We're saying that anyone who has a dominant position in a local area, all of them must have a living will. We're not saying you might fail, therefore you must have a living will. We're saying because you have this market dominance, there must be in place a plan that can be enacted if something happened. So we're not trying to predict failure, I don't think, are we? But I mean, I'm slightly with you. This is a difficult area that needs a lot of thought.
So you described perfectly what happened at Southern Cross. Yeah. And the key challenge at Southern Cross was the continuity of care. If Southern Cross had been a widget factory, it would have failed. That's just absolutely, as a business, it would have failed. There were a whole set of issues about the structure of that business. And I think government then took the view, in the absence of any other market oversight, that failure of the continuity of care for 30,000 individuals was just not a tenable or acceptable position. And I think what we're being asked to do is ensure that where there is failure, that there is continuity of care, and the living will is a mechanism that has been selected as a way of ensuring there's continuity of care for those individuals. So you are absolutely right. We need to pick our way through these arguments carefully and be absolutely clear what the role is that we're being asked to undertake. And we need to avoid placing ourselves in positions which overreaches that role or underscores that role. But what Southern Cross identified is that there was no organisation responsible for any market oversight whatsoever, and therefore that fell to the Department of Health to carry out that responsibility. And in effect, what the department did is it provided a failure regime for Southern Cross. The delivery of the solution to Southern Cross was largely delivered through the private sector, who were encouraged to accept responsibility for this, and indeed that's in effect what happened in the end. My personal view about Southern Cross is it was a very satisfactory resolution because all 31,000 residents ended up with their care being continued. Would we be able to operate with the same levers as a regulator that are available to national government? Perhaps not. But in a sense, what we're being asked to do is identify where there are risks and issues, and then ensure, as David has said, where there are those risks, that there are living wills in place that will actually ensure that people are beginning to predict and anticipate these. So I think the issue is, as people lend and borrow money, that they will need to build into their financial planning the fact that there needs to be a living will that actually maintains some capacity and capability to ensure that in the event of an organisational failure, that there are continuity regimes. And this isn't a million miles away from the ABTA guarantees for travel companies or other bits of retail and the commercial world that provide a similar kind of guarantee. But it'd be wrong to leap to this has been worked out in detail and all the nuances and nooks and crannies of this have actually been worked out. They've not, which is why it's significant that we've got till April 2015 to be clear about this, and it will be one of the primary responsibilities of the incoming Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care to begin to work with the sector to work this up in the operational detail that will be required.
So I just want to check my understanding of this last paragraph, because I think it's the Oxford Brookes bit that is slightly confusing in this, because one could understand this piece of research about being ongoing intelligence which helps us to identify risky social care providers, and I didn't read it as that. I read it as being intelligence which would help us to describe the parameters of who should be in this list of care homes that we have oversight of, because their failure would be so serious to users of service, and who isn't. And we need a different kind of metric to the one that we have at the moment. It's not about quality of care, it's about sustainability of the service, and that we because we don't understand enough about that, we're asking Oxford Brookes to help us so we can see whether it is 50 or 60, and going forward what kind of entities should be in our sites in this regime. Is that right, David?
I think, David, the best thing to do is for me to give you a fuller report on what we're asking Oxford Brookes to do. But no, it's not quite right. What we're asking Oxford Brookes to do is do some market analysis. So we know well how many services we're registering and deregistering from one day to the next in real time, quite frankly. We don't need to ask anybody else for that. We don't know as of routine which private equity firm is on the market looking to take over another group, which will then have an implication, as Steve said, on the way that companies are going to be owned, the way they're going to be set up. And what Oxford Brookes are doing is looking at that broader market activity, which is not just about what's happening, but there's about, I think it's 10 of the large care groups need to be refinanced as a consequence of the changes which took place in 2008, where they are over-leveraged, in the words of Southern Cross, and therefore at one level could present a risk to the sustainability and integrity of the business, which could lead to issues around continuity of care. Some of those, Four Seasons, were over-leveraged, and they've successfully refinanced. And that refinancing would look to have removed some of the risk that was presented from that 2008 deal. A number of others that were financed in before the September of 2008, some in 2008, some in 2007, on the face of it would look to be over-leveraged and look to provide a risk. So they will be either negotiating their refinance packages or have refinanced. So the Oxford Brookes is not just looking at that. The number of market analysts looking at this are probably Langham Beeson, a commercial organisation, and Oxford Brookes have been developing some work in this area, and what we've been wanting to do is make that work available to us, so we've got intelligence on an area that we don't routinely and regularly look at, and that's the way that we've been trying to deal with that. If this has been conflated, my apologies for this, and I'll bring you a separate report which actually pulls out what Oxford Brookes is doing, and from the work we're being asked to do on market oversight. Okay. So the next section of this report is on progress and delivery. I think Mark is going to touch on some of the issues around our delivery. We've set out our deliverables in 13-14. We are on track with our inspection work during 13-14. One of the learnings that we've got from last year is that we'll monitor this much more closely in terms of issues around run rate, etc., as we move forward through this year. And there is a report for information that Amanda's produced on lessons learnt from the 12-13 programme that are informing the way the 13-14 delivery programme is being taken forward. And we'll report on our performance in terms of the delivery of the strategy. On thematic reviews, 4 reviews were approved by the board in 2012 to be undertaken to March this year. These were reviews into hospital admissions from care homes, access to secondary care and dementia. They've all been undertaken and published. The fourth area was a survey into the physical health needs of people with learning disabilities. That's not yet been completed. That's slipped and will be completed by October 13. I just wanted to advise the board of the slippage on that, but also the progress of the other three.
My memory isn't very good, but I thought we were doing a thematic review of waiting times. I remember that from the Leeds board meeting, which presumably was when these were approved. Your first meeting?
Your memory is better than that. I'm sorry, Steve, I'd have to go away and check it. I thought this was the agreed programme. So what we did in the back end of 12 is actually we reshaped. I think, if I remember correctly, we brought a report that said there'd been lots of discussion about what we would look at on thematic reviews, but in order to allocate the resource, and I think we got 2 spare slots that we needed to allocate in when we brought the report in the autumn of last year, and that agreed these were the 4 thematic reviews that we'd complete. So it may well have been on the broader list, Steve, that then got selected down. But let's go back and check the minutes and just check. If I could come now to Winterbourne View, I wanted to reassure the board that we continue to take forward the recommendations on Winterbourne View. One of the key issues here is the work we are undertaking to actually look at the requirements at registration around the responsibility that's placed on boards around quality. We're choosing to take this forward by looking at the way that we register organisations, and will revise the statements of purpose, the fit persons assessment, and the guidance about visits will be launched next month, and we'll continue to ensure that experts by experience are involved in inspections, importantly on inspections of assessments and treatment units, where a number of these concerns came through and where we continue to have current concerns about the appropriateness of the model of care that is offered. We are signatories to a compact that the Department of Health are pursuing, and the Minister is holding a review meeting in the next few weeks in relation to updating progress on this. And those updates include some of the representatives of the families that were involved in Winterbourne View, and Norman Lamb is particularly keen to get an update, and we will use our monitoring of this to inform that update that the Minister will take forward.
Would it be possible for the board to receive a report on the progress we're making on the sort of recommendations in regard to Winterbourne? I know you've just given us a very sort of brief overview, which is helpful, but I would certainly value, even if it's just sort of once a year, for us to sort of be sort of kept informed about whether we're sort of meeting, where we're responding to the recommendations and the progress that we're making. And just as an aside, I was recently at a hospital that was very like Winterbourne View, a private place, a secure place, where people were with learning disability and very challenging behaviour, and lots of people there are placed from all over the country. And I came across an example where an individual was being assessed for a bespoke placement. It was very kind of impressive. They were doing everything they could to get this individual to go back to the local area, and we're actually sort of building something specifically for this individual. And they, made a point of saying that this was as a result of the Winterbourne Review. And it was also noticeable this hospital was half empty, which I think probably wasn't very good for the hospital, but certainly probably good for service users. So that's, it's an anecdote, but I think it's also evidence that the panorama and the Winterbourne Review does seem to be having an impact on individuals.
But on that first point that
Yeah,
on the first point that Kay made, I think we do need to keep coming back to Winterbourne, just making sure that, you were saying just once a year maybe, just double check that we have got the lessons have been learned.
I'm very happy to do that. I think one of the ambitions was that we would, in the business plan monitoring and the performance reporting to the board, we will be reporting on the delivery of the ambitions that are in the strategy, the business plan, and the business plan reporting will be capturing two sets of progress. The progress that we've got against Robert Francis's reports and recommendations, and the recommendations in relation to Winterbourne. So that will be coming through on a monthly basis in accordance with the normal reporting that Mark will do, and I think he's going to present some of this later. But we can bring a bespoke report which would give that detailed review against the Winterbourne
I
recommendations.
think so long as we're doing that on a regular basis, you're happy with that, Kay? Are you against Winterbourne? Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
So the next item was mid-staffs. We are linking each of the recommendations to our business plan, and we'll report on that. And as we've already discussed in answer to the question earlier, we're really pleased to have secured Robert Francis to come and have a fuller discussion with us at the July board on his recommendations, and we'll update on our progress. Other activity, we've commented on the NHS England business plan. If I may just take a minute, David, and just update the board in relation to the Grant Thornton review. I did write and update board members about the difficulty of bringing this report to a conclusion. The difficulty that we've had has really been in ensuring that we consulted our legal advice about the issues in relation to publishing a report and making that available in a public forum. That legal advice has been complicated and complex and quite detailed. I think we've now concluded that legal advice, and I anticipate receiving the report on the 31st of this month, which will then allow us to move to publication of the report in June. We will need to conclude that legal advice, but I just wanted to advise the board of the reasons for the delay. It's not because we've been reluctant to bring this matter to a conclusion, far from it. It's because we need to be absolutely clear about the nature of the legal position CQC finds itself in and how we bring that to a conclusion. I also draw attention in this report to the changes that the Parliamentary and Health Ombudsman are making to their criteria for the reports. It's a significant change that Julie Mellor is making, where we'll see the Ombudsman publishing and investigating far more complaints in relation to health. Currently they run a few hundred, and they're actually planning to investigate about 5,000 complaints this year, in relation to health-related matters.
Just on that, I mean, presumably that'll be a very good source of information for us for the surveillance activities. You need to press the button, Paul.
That's absolutely right, as is the complaints review by Anne Clwyd and Trish Hart. Also we need to feed into our work.
Where has that got to, that complaints review done by Anne Clwyd and Tricia Hart?
It was commissioned by Secretary of State of the Prime Minister. My understanding is that it's due to report in July, and we're setting up time with them to both feed in our thoughts on where they may want to look and our proposals on some of the recommendations.
I'm also on the advisory committee of the complaints. They've had one meeting, and there'll be a meeting which will consider their recommendations. That meeting's in June for the July publication. We were invited to attend a Health and Wellbeing Summit, which brought the key NHS-facing organisations together under the leadership of Dame Carol Black, and this was to commit to a Health and Wellbeing Concordat, which effectively says that staff that are supported to be healthy and well will actually deliver better services. I think Alison has been leading some work prior to this Concordat about CQC's own health and wellbeing strategy, and that allowed us to be able to contribute easily, in a sense, to the commitments that were being made. But on behalf of CQC, I committed to that. We've also been asked to support some work on integrated care and support. This is something that sets out the commitments of a broad range of organisations to actually work in to support integrated care. Again, on behalf of CQC, I felt it was appropriate for us to support this and have done that. What this means for what we need to do is, as we develop our new inspection methodologies, we need to look at how we work, not just in the NHS in social care, but how we work across the NHS social care and primary medical services.
Clearly integrated care is a rightly flavour of the month at the moment. It has been for some time. And the government are launching these 12 pioneer projects. I mean, is there a role for us in CQC to monitor the effectiveness of these integrated care pilots, to try and come out as an independent assessment of how they're working?
Certainly, I think we need to be developing our methodologies about how we inspect integrated care. There's a number of acute trusts now that are providing social care services, a number that plan to do so. So I think in some respects we already do this, but certainly the chief inspectors of hospitals and adult social care will need to work well. I think the pilots have got an academic evaluation running alongside them as well. So I think there probably is a conversation to have with the department about how that academic evaluation and what we might, because these will be taking place in organisations that we register now. So just working out how we, as part of our inspection activity, might accommodate that is something that we can probably take away and look at.
I think that's right. It particularly fits under our views on responsive care. And as we're developing those for the consultation document, we want to be putting into the pioneer sites to make sure there's a consistent understanding of what good responsive integrated care actually looks like on the ground.
Have we decided on all our thematic inspection reviews for the forthcoming year? Have we still got I'm just thinking about if you take the frail elderly who are not getting good treatment at the moment because they're bouncing into A&Es so often, but could be looked after if their care was managed more at home. Is that an area that we could look at from a thematic inspection?
We haven't developed the plan for the whole year. We came back to the board with a number of small projects that we wanted to start, but we wanted to develop those alongside the developments around the consultation and the strategy this year. So the answer is there are some possibilities that we could do that, and we can have a look at that and bring those back to the board. I think there are other areas that are emerging as well that we've had some discussions about.
Paragraph 15, we published our deprivation of liberty safeguards report in January, and we are following up some of the lessons that came out of that report with MOJ, particularly on how these can be further rolled out and extended. If you remember, the report was really flagging up that the degree of knowledge and awareness around deprivation of liberty safeguards is very poor. And with the increasing numbers of people who are receiving services without capacity, I think going back to the Parliamentary and Health Ombudsman, I think she was referring to a particular case yesterday in the media that was reported in the press and electronically as well, of where these issues around consent were not well managed, and the consequence of that is that people received inadequate care. So again, continuing to push to get greater traction around deprivation of liberty safeguards is important, and one of the byproducts of publishing our report earlier this year is to follow up with MOJ, who are responsible as the host department for that.
On that point, David, when we discussed this report, a couple of local authorities were mentioned as having absolutely no one in this category, which we found hard to believe, and you were going to write to them, David. Did we get a response? So it's actually in the follow-up actions, I think, from the other meeting. What we've done is we've gone back to intelligence to double-check the data, and the intention will be, once we've done that, that David will write to the local authorities as suggested. We wanted to just check the other areas as well.
And then lastly, David, is the issue on progress on appointments, but you covered those at the beginning of the meeting. If you may, I'll just add my thanks to Amanda and Louise for the work that they've done over many years. Louise and myself and Amanda go back a long way, so thank you both very much. But also delighted to welcome Hilary, who's not at this meeting, but has come in and is beginning to make a difference in terms of managing the programme, and welcome Paul. We interviewed yesterday for the Chief Inspector of Hospitals. We anticipate being able to make an announcement about that at the beginning of next week. And we interview on Friday for the Director of Corporate Services, and we'll progress that speedily, and I anticipate being able to make an announcement on that next week as well. So we are making good progress on that. The advert for the Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care will appear in the weekend of the 2nd of June, which is the next full weekend, where the Sunday newspapers will run an appointment schedule. This weekend they're not going to do, so if we wanted maximum coverage, we'd gone for that weekend. So that's the update on staffing, David. Thank you. Thank you. And yesterday, the Secretary of State made a speech where he announced the introduction of a Chief Inspector of, I think the phraseology used was general practice. It will be to oversee the work we undertake in relation to primary medical services, which are general practices, and dentists and that work. So we'll work through Alison's team has been undertaken in relation to drafting job specifications and all the necessary HR work, and we'll begin the recruitment and search for that process, so we can get the advert out in the next few weeks and get that appointment process well underway before the summer holiday period starts, Parliament recesses, etc., very much with a view to getting a successful candidate in into the autumn of this year. So progress is being made.
Sorry, just to prove I can be a broken record, I welcome all of that enormously. But a point I've made before when we've talked about this specialisation in the inspection regime is that actually there's a danger that we lose the integrated kind of whole consumer sort of service offering that we increasingly need to focus on. And indeed, when we were just talking about the integration agenda, you know, where there's a big political focus. So I just, as you're working through those job descriptions, thinking about how we play integration into this, and how we assure ourselves as a board that that we're not becoming focused only on the sectors but also on the services across the piece.
Point very well made, and we're absolutely conscious of that. I mean, there has been a suggestion that not integration is not a word that everyone likes, but that should be in everyone's job title in a sense. It's not Chief Inspector of Hospitals, it should Chief Inspector of Hospitals and. But anyway, the point is well made.
So each job description has in that requirement to look at integrated care and a requirement to work with others, and without declaring questions to candidates that have not yet come forward for interviews, rest assured that this is an issue that we want to pursue.
Thanks for your report, David. Two quick questions. On the Grant Thornton report, you said you hope to receive it on May the 31st and then publish in June. Is that 100% definite, or is there still the possibility that it would be delayed further, just so that we're clear? The other thing is, I'm conscious we every year we publish the State of Care report, and I just wondered if that's what we're going to do it this year, and where the thinking is on that, given that we are going through this sort of change process. So, yeah.
So on Grant Thornton Care, the reason I said I hope to publish it in June was that does there still remain a degree of risk? So the report will go, it will be received. I would want our legal team to actually look at that to make sure that it's something that we are able to publish. So there will be a process that we need to go through. I am anticipating this will come to us in a way that there is no need for any further discussion, that we can actually just get on and do it. But until I receive it, this goes back, until I receive it, I'm not able to give you an absolute assurance on that, which is why I said hope. But that is the plan, and that's what we'll work to. In terms of the state of care report, our intention is to publish that. We're scheduling October for that. Again, that needs to be agreed by the board. The key issue here is that we're dependent on data which goes into the Health and Social Care Information Centre to report on the year, and they don't give final audited data that we could confidently use in a report, and they can't guarantee that being available to us to July. So it does mean that we need to work with the data that's available by the end of July to actually finalise our state of care report into what we think will be October. So that's what we're planning on. So we can't do it any earlier because we can't get the data that we need because we're dependent on the Health and Social Care Information Centre. This is a big issue for us moving forward about the timeliness of data coming to us, but everything we report on is not just our data. Some of it is data that we use that goes to the Health and Social Care Information Centre. So we're planning on an October report, and we need to agree the publication timetable.
Thank you very much, David. Next item, Mark, Finance.
Thank you, Chair.
No,
so
it's not corporate performance
report. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. We've reported quarterly to the board over the year on progress against the last year's plans. This is very much a kind of end-of-year position statement. A number of the indicators on our performance will go into the annual report, and as we do after every board meeting, we will publish our performance against those key measures. And what this report does, I think, is just reflects on challenges that we've had throughout the year in terms of the business plan that we've put forward, and that overall the majority of the commitments that we set out have been met. Particularly picking on one or two areas that I've highlighted in the first couple of pages of the report around inspection activity in particular, and the number of inspections, over 35,000 inspections that we were able to complete, and our inspection programme. The work that's been done in terms of bringing into regulation the primary medical services, the launch of HealthWatch, and work up in the NCSE in terms of their performance. So there's a lot of significant achievements I think we can point to. The report also highlights where we haven't met the standards that we wanted to do, particularly around how quickly we're publishing some of the reports, around some of the SOED indicators. There's a lot of challenges still that come out of the staff survey, for example, that we're looking to pick those up on. But I think overall this shows it's been a challenging year. It's interesting that we've delivered a vast majority of that whilst the indicators around staff sickness, for example, have remained low, turnover has remained low within the organisation. So a lot of challenges within the organisation, but I think overall the report's reflecting a good position for us in a difficult year. Moving forward, we've got an equally challenging business plan that was approved by the board, and we will be bringing back to the board regular reports on the performance around how we're getting on in delivering the strategy, our progress against the recommendations from Winterbourne and Mid Staffordshire, and the key indicators particularly around the inspection programme as well. So that will be carrying forward. And what we're also looking to do is improve, continuing to improve the quality of the measures that we have in our scorecard, particularly around more outcome-based measures. But in terms of this report, which is the looking back, I think overall there's we're putting we're able to say there's been significant achievements in the commitments we set out in that original plan.
Thanks very much, John. I think on behalf of the board, actually, we should congratulate all the inspectors and all the teams who have done, well, 36,000 inspections, which is a very impressive performance. Amanda and your team and all the others involved, well done. Terrific. Any other, Anna? Press your thing.
Sorry, a couple of things. I mean, you're quite right. We should applaud a huge set of achievements. So, and I'm afraid I'm going to point to a few where I think there are issues. But what I find really helpful about this report is it helps to pinpoint some of the areas where we didn't meet our expectations last year, which I would like to suggest that when we get the quarterly performance reports, we as a board ask for updates on over this next period to reassure ourselves that what we didn't do last year we've had in our sights and improved on this year. And the compliance and registration kind of turnaround is one, access to SOAD reports is another, and actually importantly I think in one of the annexes to this there's some data about, I'm looking particularly at the NHS locations who've been non-compliant for a year, for instance, which kind of seems to settle out at a figure of around 20%, looking at the average across a quarter, which is a pretty high level for consistent non-compliance over a year. So really helpful to see all of this in one go and kind of to pick out the small number of things and report on those in an ongoing way. I would find particularly helpful.
On that last point that Anna's making, Amanda, NHS lookers have been non-compliant for over a year, seem to be running, 20, 22, it's a high number, isn't it? Would you like to just comment on that?
Could I come in as well? There's a related question about that, which is that actually the number has been increasing. If you compare the data with a year ago, the number of locations which are outstanding for over a year has increased very significantly in all the sectors that we operate. And I think this is a question not just of process data, it's actually a question of what does this data mean? What is it telling us? And if we can have some explanation of that, I'd be really grateful.
Amanda,
I'm sure that we can get a full report through to ARAC on what the data is telling us and what does it mean, rather than trying to address it at the board meeting, although I'd be very happy to bring forward a full report to a full board meeting after discussion with ARAC. I think the board are right to be concerned about the length of non-compliance in a number of organisations. Over the last 12 months, we've worked very hard across all directorates in CQC, one, to try and identify what are meaningful measures to use in our enforcement tracking and our reporting, but secondly, to start to answer some of the challenges that it poses about so what does that mean about absolute quality and safety of service. What we are tracking very carefully is the action plans provided by provider organisations through to us. We now have an indicator that says that we will follow up within a maximum of 12 weeks from the compliance date that's imposed on organisations where we've identified non-compliance to minimise the impacts on patient and service user experience of non-compliance. And clearly, as the CQC strategy develops and as the new failure and intervention regime develops for the NHS post the Robert Francis inquiry, there will be a need for CQC to adapt and amend its reporting of its enforcement activity apropos what Monitor and the Trust Development Authority will do with NHS organisations going forward.
But Amanda, putting myself back to where I was before I came here at the Norfolk and Norwich, if we had a non-compliant thing from CQC, we took that incredibly seriously, and we would bust our backside to make sure that we were not compliant, when you came back in 6 weeks' time or something. Here we seem to have got 20% of trusts who are consistently non-compliant, quarter to quarter to quarter. Is it because they don't care, or because they think that? I don't understand that, I have to say. Why are they non-compliant for so long?
I think there are a number of factors. It wouldn't be my experience of working with boards and chief executives of both social care and NHS organisations that they don't care. If it's as obvious as they don't care, then we have escalated actions, and that is one of the key indicators of responsiveness and risk, the reaction that we get when we identify non-compliance and how seriously boards in particular take CQC's concerns. There are different elements of non-compliance that have been identified. Some of them don't lend themselves to correction in a short space of time. The reporting is still fairly crude, that it could be that a provider has been non-compliant over the 12 months, but they've been non-compliant in different areas of service. So we may have gone into, for example, using the NHS into accident and emergency, identified non-compliance, that was addressed, then gone in through the Dignity and Nutrition Programme and looked at medical wards and found non-compliance in a different area, in a different service. Now, that's of little comfort if you're receiving care in any of those services, and I think it needs to be addressed at a governance and leadership and culture level going forward, but it is one of the explanations behind what is fairly crude and raw data, that it isn't that CQC has allowed, or indeed boards of organisations have allowed non-compliance to drift in the same area of service over that 12 months.
Yeah, my question is on the SOADs, because it was red for ages and now it's amber, and I just wanted to clarify whether that does represent a true improvement, because I notice it's a SOAD attending, for example, within 10 working days, and I wasn't sure if that had, whether we've changed the times and that's why it's no longer red, or whether it actually does represent a true improvement. And also, are there plans to improve it or any further?
Very happy to comment on that. Yes, it does represent an improvement. There's been a lot of work specifically to improve the SOAD indicators. As you say, quite rightly, Kay, they've remained red and unreasonably so for a long time. The SOAD opinion is a key human rights protection for people detained and being treated against their will. The root cause of this is having enough SOADs available who are flexible enough to attend to patients early, and so hence the differential between the different types of opinions in terms of when we've said that they are more urgent. I'm pleased to say that we've recruited recently another 28 SOADs. 10 of those are being inducted on the 24th of May and the 14th of June, and another 9 are already now up and running. We calculate that we will still need about another 31 to be absolutely at the strength we need to do to make all of these targets, to achieve all of those. And so we've agreed with HR and colleagues this is a rolling programme of recruitment. It takes a lot of time. We had 80 people apply, and we've actually only appointed 28. So the bar is high, but we don't think we should drop that bar. So it should continue to improve. There are specific plans which we're developing now to look at the ECT opinions, because that's the area that we think is most important to take a targeted approach towards. The other side of this is that we're also developing the work around the quality of the SOAD opinions. Part of that comes out in terms of the Winterbourne View recommendations and the use of reports under Section 61 of the Mental Health Act. So I hope to be able to update the board in more detail as to that. But it's going in the right direction, and there's a concentrated effort to continue to improve that.
So just to clarify, you're saying that the performance has improved. It isn't just changing the indicator, because that's what. No, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Chair, thank you. I was going to raise 3 points. One of them has already been raised, but I still think we do need to understand how and why more organisations are now non-compliant than they were, significantly more than they were a year ago. Not necessarily at this meeting, but I do think it's the job of the regulator to understand what is happening among those that it regulates. And I'm still very frustrated that we don't understand and can't explain what's actually happening. The two other points I wanted to raise were, first of all, about the Mental Health Act work of the Commission, and some points have already been made on that. But I don't understand why it is that over a month after the end of the quarter to which it relates, we can't actually report performance. I mean, what we can elsewhere in the organisation. Why is it that we can't in our Mental Health Act work?
there's a very simple answer to that, which is that the SOAD reporting, the information isn't recorded within the CRM. There is work going on about that at the moment. It's part of the online services work, and I think, Chris, you might be able to say a bit more about that. There are potential solutions, having a mental health portal to make sure that the information is more timely.
Okay, I mean, I don't particularly want a long explanation now, but what I would like at some point is a date when we are going to be able to bring the Mental Health Act work into the normal management reporting system in a reasonable time. I mean, it just seems to me to be unacceptable that we are, how many years it is into running this commission, and we still can't report on a reasonable timescale key management information. So I'm not going to flog it anymore now, but I do think we need to have that information. The final point I want to make is on the very interesting data which I hadn't seen before, perhaps that's my fault, I don't know, about complaints. And on page 6 and 7 is a brief summary of complaints made against the Commission, which the good news is are that they've gone down in the last year compared with the previous year. And there's quite an interesting analysis of how long it takes to get through the complaint system and what the complaints are about. However, at the end of the management report, in the section, you don't need to look it up, I'll read it to you, but in the section marked definitions, it says the CQC welcomes comments and suggestions about the performance and conduct of staff, including complaints about the CQC. Every complaint is investigated and the feedback used to develop and improve the Commission's services. What I'd like to know is how many of these 414 complaints were actually found to be valid, because that piece of information isn't contained in the report. And secondly, can we have some examples of where we've learnt something from and implemented changes as a result of the complaints? Not necessarily now, David, but at some point.
Can we have a report to the board to the next board meeting on the complaints and ones we've learned from the complaints? Would that be all right? Who would do that?
Yes, it would have been me, and it will be Alison, as Alison will be taking over managerial responsibility temporarily for the complaint system. I'm more than happy to arrange for that to be provided for the next board meeting.
Okay, thank you. And just secondly, Anna, just on the first point that John made, I mean, would that be a good idea to take a report back to the ARAC committee, which is really giving greater analysis around these trusts that have had warning notices out for over a year? What essential standards are being breached? Is it the same trust, same standard? That kind of analysis.
Again, I'll similarly arrange for that to go to either the routine ARAC or the risk ARAC meeting.
Okay, thank you. Anna?
Sorry, so I had a second set of points. Just to say on that, the stuff around being non-compliant for a year or more, I just think we as a board need to be really clear that we're not content to see people who we regulate, the entities that we regulate in that position, and so again, to have closer oversight at ARAC is great, but I think it's something we very much need to focus on. So when we get the kind of the quarterly performance, to have some narrative around that and how that's working through on a quarterly basis would be great. But my second point was around the follow through on the thematic reviews. So at 3 we report on thematic reviews on dignity and nutrition and home care, and I think when we took both of these reports at the board, we were clear that actually, although 2/3 of the two-thirds of the care homes in the case of dignity and nutrition were found compliant, and 74% in relation to home care, actually that means that 1/3 weren't and 1/4 weren't. And that's a pretty significant number as far as consumers and users of services are concerned. And I think something, therefore, that we as a board should again want to see kind of a routine quarterly update on how we're doing in respect of that. Now, I know these were themed inspections, so we're not in a position to report exactly on how this is going, but that there is some work to give us confidence that this situation will not still be there in a year's time, a year after publication. I think is something we need to think around and work out how we assure ourselves of that.
Good point, Anne. I mean, just as a matter of interest, I mean, when we have a thematic inspection, what is the follow-up from that? We publish the report. It sets out what the state of the care is in that particular sector. What is the follow-on from that, Philip? Amanda?
If we are undertaking a thematic inspection as opposed to a thematic review or a thematic probe, if we've done some inspection activity, which these two programmes were, and we've identified non-compliance, that is followed through under our registration powers. So we will be able to extract the individual locations where non-compliance was identified in the thematic programme and to track that through the performance data, and I'm sure that it would be a relatively straightforward task to bring a 6-month review or a 12-month review of those organisations identified to a future board.
Could we do that then? I mean, as a matter of course, I think when we do a thematic inspection, presumably when we did the Dignity Nutrition inspections, that came back to the board, did it? Going back in time? Well, I think when we do a thematic one, it would be good to have that 6-month. Would that be reasonable after 6 months to have a report back as to the follow-up?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. That's a reasonable time period, is it? Yeah. Okay. John, anything else on your report?
No, I mean, just so particularly Anna's earlier point about some of the areas that we flagged up here of underperformance. I mean, those measures are actually in 13-14, so we will pick them up, but I'll make sure they're highlighted as areas of concern. And I think the other thing is we're also seeing a lot richer information coming through here, so inevitably that's asking for further information, raising questions, which we're looking to work through, both in terms of the complaints and what they're saying, in terms of the data. On sectors, and I think that's what this report should be doing, flagging areas that we need to take away and just work through more, and I think that's what we need to just carry on doing, and we'll report that back to the usual regular intervals to board.
Okay, thank you. Can you move on to the finance report?
I can. There's two linked reports there. I'll just give a quick summary of both of them. One's kind of the end of year position on the finances, and one's on the 13-14 budget. In terms of the end of year position, there's the audit process going on currently, and it will come back to the board in June in terms of the annual report and accounts. So this is the position currently. The variations I've set out in the report, but overall, the net position, including the depreciation, is showing an underspend of 5.4 million, 700k underspend against staff costs, particularly because we've been holding vacancies across for most of the year. Some increase in income of 300,000, and the draw on the grant in aid, we were under by 1 million on that. The capital budget was underspent by half a million, and that position, as I say, is being going through the audit process at the moment. There's a timetable on that report on when it's coming back, but essentially be part of the annual reports and accounts in the end of June. So that's a summary of last year's budgets. In terms of 13-14, what's been agreed with the Department of Health is effectively the overall budget's increased by 26 million. 20 million of that is attributable to the increased costs we need to deliver the transformation, the strategy that's been set out, and we've worked that through with the Department of Health. We've got increase in funding to do that. There's an increase in our capital budget of 5 million for that work as well, and a 6 million increase in some of the recurring staff budgets. So overall, with the increase in the income that we're expecting of 7 million this year, mainly because of the primary medical services, the net effect of that all is a £24 million increase in budget, and we will be tracking that, reporting that back through this board, through our quarterly meetings that we have with the Department of Health, and particularly in terms of the transformation costs there. Hillary's role as Director of Change will be tracking those costs in terms of the transformation piece. So I'm happy to answer any questions around that, but that's the position from the finance, both last year, end of year, and the budget that we've got for 13-14.
Any questions for that? John, thank you very much for that. And the risk register is you as well.
So we've got I'll put forward so we've got regular risk register report that I've set out here, and in some sense what it's saying is I think there's been a lot of work on risk management across the organisation, and I think we're in a better place now, but actually I think there's, in terms of corporate and business risk, there's quite a bit more we need to do. The business plan that was signed off at the last board included within it a number of strategic risks in here, which we put as an annex to this report and provided an update. And I think there's a piece of work that needs to better align the risks that are within that plan with our other risk registers in the organisation, and that work's ongoing. We shared some of that with the last ARAC meeting, and we've got some meetings set up to try and work some of that through. So I think what this report is saying, there's a train of work to improve where we are on risk management. I think the starting point is the strategic risks that was signed off by the board and is within the business plan for next year. We have given an update on the risks of those specifically, but more to flag that we feel there's more work going on and is going on now, and we're particularly working closely with members of the ARAC committee around that, but we'll be reporting that back to board on the progress that we're making.
John, did you want to comment at all?
Not really, just to say that there's work ongoing, as Mark has said, with the ARAC committee, and I hope that by the middle of the financial year we will have a reworked risk register which aligns with our corporate and strategic plans, and will be able to give the board the assurance that it needs that risk is being properly managed in the organisation.
Thank you. Philip, it's you next.
Thank you, Chair. This is a proposal for a 2-year programme for CQC to review health services in relation to child safeguarding and services for looked after children. Board members may recollect that last year CQC and Ofsted completed a 3-year programme of inspections on safeguarding children and services for looked after children. There was a plan to go forward with a multi-agency inspection programme, including not just Ofsted, although it was an Ofsted-led piece of work, but also including Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, Probation and Prisons. Unfortunately, Ofsted have taken the decision to defer the start of that piece of work, those pieces of work, which really has 2 net effects, which are set out in the report, but if I can just summarise very briefly. The first one is that the inspection programme was being led by Ofsted and was done under the auspices of their statutory powers. So we've had to go back and speak to Louise and her colleagues to look at how we could go forward with this. So alongside the discussions we're having with Ofsted about what we will next do around our commitment to work jointly with other organisations, we have an immediate risk about the need to make sure that we're properly inspecting the health component in terms of looked after children and safeguarding, which is our responsibility. And our proposal is that we use our powers under Section 48 to do so, and that's been based on advice from our legal teams. Obviously that requires us to seek approval from the Secretary of State. I have to say that the Department of Health and the Children's team within that are very supportive of us bringing actions forward. You'll also see that there's been significant work done to scope how we go forward. We want to use some of the methodologies that we had already developed in conjunction with the other inspectorates to do single agency inspection for the CQC. Our intention would be to start that from September, if not before. And the work will be using the case tracking methodology, so it's about going along, talking to people, looking at cases, following those through, and particularly using those to develop key lines of inquiry. Because this is not a compliance inspection in its traditional terms, this offers us some opportunities. We have a team of 10 specialist inspectors in children's services, so it gives us an opportunity to look at how they can better use their judgment rather than simply looking at compliance issues, and that's the work that we are currently doing at the moment. So those are the two main issues. As I say, I'm going from this meeting today to meet with Ofsted for a hothouse session in terms of what we might plan to do in the future with the other inspectorates. So this is still very much our commitment, because we believe that's the most important thing for children in these circumstances and for services. There's been some useful discussions, so in terms of governance and how we work in a multi-agency way, there is now a new meeting between the chief inspectors and chief executives of the various inspectorates, which David will be involved in, who will take the output of some of the work that we're doing and then look at how that will best fit within all agencies in terms of going forward. We plan this as a 2-year interim solution because we feel that's the right time scale to make sure that we've got proper cover. Clearly, if things change before then we can look at readjusting the programme again, but this is our proposal at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think we should be inspecting, and the way you've proposed seems fine. Seems a good way around it. What I wanted to raise is that I mean, a group that I think is really very vulnerable and really sort of concerns me and others is children, and particularly adolescents that are in inpatient mental health units. Usually they're sort of adolescent units, but often because they're in a specialist service, they're out of area. And whilst I know that we have our Mental Health Act commissioners visiting detained people, I just not sure that the kind of arrangements for monitoring the care that young people get when they're detained in these units, whether it is actually robust enough, because they are very, very vulnerable, especially when they're a long way from home.
I absolutely agree with that point. I think it's really important, particularly the way that children and adolescent mental health is organised. They are often regional or super regional units, so there's quite a distance from people's home area. I think I think we need to make sure that is a priority in the way that we do this work. But I think, Amanda, you wanted to comment.
We do inspect, because it's provided as part of a regulated activity, as part of an NHS registered organisation. But you're absolutely right, it's historically been a service where lots of attention needs to be paid, not least to understand that people don't fall through the cracks at transition from children's services per se into adult services.
So will that will definitely be a key feature of this work, because it'd be good to get a sort of firm commitment, or at least clarity on it.
I certainly undertake to take that forward and make sure it is properly included.
On that point, just reinforce what Amanda said. So irrespective of where these 10 inspectors go, every time we go into a registered service to inspect, particularly for adolescent units and children's units, safeguarding is one of the things that is looked at. So in a sense, there's 2 levels to this care. One is the level which is our regular routine inspection activity of registered services, and then the other is how we might look across, and historically this team has looked across services, not just at particular institutions. And I think this is how this group of 10 inspectors needs to be deployed over the next 2 years, whilst our ordinary inspectors continue to move in. I think this issue about whether all of our staff have the sufficient training and background and expertise, I include Mental Health Act commissioners in this, around safeguarding is a key issue that we need to attend to. So I think there's 2 or 3 checks and balances to answer your question. But I wouldn't want to conflate what Philip's talking about with the stuff that Amanda's just talked about. It's really important we keep those separate.
Thank you. Philip, item 9.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Board members will remember that we've had discussions about the formation of the National Information and Governance Committee before and their purpose. This paper represents an update on the appointment to the committee itself. Myself and other colleagues, including Louise, supported Steve in terms of the appointment process for that committee, the first meeting of which is on the 10th of June. So there are 4 appointed nominated representatives, shall I say, from various organisations, Healthwatch England, NHS England, the Information Commissioner's Office and the Health and Social Care Information Centre. And following the interviews, and we had a very good lineup of prospective candidates, the proposal is to appoint 5 additional members of that committee. Their role is set out in more detail within the terms of reference, but I think it's worth saying that the early part of their work will be to advise this board. They are an advisory committee to the board in terms of the options of how we discharge our responsibilities to monitor and improve in this area. So, Steve, I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Well, just very briefly. Very briefly, Chair. The interview process was handled by the HR people very effectively, very smoothly. We had a strong list of candidates and the interviews took place over a period of time, and I'm very happy with the people we've appointed. I have to say I had some reservations at the start because such was the level of expertise needed in this field, of which I'm not as familiar as I will be soon, I'm sure, but I think we've got a good balance on the team. I've already contacted the nominated representatives on the committee. I haven't spoken to them yet, but we've exchanged emails, and I will be talking to them before the meeting. And it's just my own personal reflection is that given the geographical location of most of the committee members, we won't be meeting in London very often. The point I think that I wanted to draw to the board's attention was in the terms of references is the critical paragraph is 1.4, where our committee has no executive powers, and then in 1.5 we're only in place for 2 years, and I think we have got to make sure that we don't hang around and that we make sure the integration is carried forward without delay.
Just simply the board are asked in the next steps to give some approval to the appointment of the individuals.
Yeah, I mean, the only comment I was going to make, I know there's somebody from Healthwatch England on the committee, and in 4.1, you've talked about your work plan being defining information governance from a user perspective, and I wondered whether that, I mean, maybe that you have a particular plan to do that, but it's an issue that comes up for certain service user groups quite a bit, and I just wondered whether there was sufficient, if you like, user voice within the committees to make sure that it actually does focus, in the interests of patients and then the public.
We did bear that strongly in mind throughout the interview process. We picked up some concerns about that, and I think the team we've got, I think reflect that concern, and certainly that was a very positive factor in choosing the people we've got. I think one of the other themes that came throughout the process was obviously we had a lot of people with experience of the Caldecott Review and other information governance structures, and I think that we emphasised throughout the process the CQC's very much the theme of the new strategy about putting people first came out very strongly in the interviews, and I'm satisfied that we've got the right team to start. I think I'm happy to take that reflection as we meet and see how that progresses and make sure that we do have that right balance throughout our existence.
Thank you very much, Steve. Louise, the approved scheme of delegation?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The paper that the board has before it today is a revisited paper. You will probably recall that there was a version of this that came to the last board meeting, which unfortunately I wasn't able to attend, and there were some questions about the content of the scheme of delegation and the purpose of that particular document. So in the meanwhile, from the time from the last meeting to this, there have been discussions, I understand, Chair, between yourself and David Behan with regard to some of the details. And also there is a little more explanatory information in the cover paper which we have before us today. In effect, Chair, we're asking the board to agree the content of the scheme of delegation as it appears here today, both in Annex A and Annex B to the paper. To remind the board that the scheme of delegation itself has been subject to a full and fundamental review, just the paper itself, and I'm looking at page 3 now of the covering paper, sets out that the scheme of delegation itself is necessarily detailed in that the purpose of it is to give clarity to everyone who either uses it, i.e. members of staff, board members, members of the executive and those outside the organisation, of exactly who is permitted to make decisions about what and at what time and in what way. So the way in which this scheme of delegation has been set out, and for the first time in this organisation we've set it out in 2 separate ways. One is a schedule which is at Annex B to the scheme of delegation, which is all of the enforcement and activity powers, registration powers that we have, but also per post, as per post. So if you were an inspector, you could look at this scheme of delegation and in one place identify exactly what decisions you are empowered to make in the day-to-day activity of your role, and likewise with any other roles within the organisation, which I personally think is a helpful innovation and change to the way in which the document is set out. The executive summary to the paper also identifies that this scheme of delegation has been reviewed to be in 2 parts. The first part, a very important element, it sets out the decisions which the board will make itself. So the areas where you as board members have identified you wish to retain decision-making powers, and the powers that you delegate to the committees of the board or indeed to the chief executive. And the second part of the scheme flows from those delegated powers that you've given to the chief executive, and is those powers that the chief executive delegates to other staff within the organisation. So 2 separate parts, the first in relation to your own decision making and the second in relation to the executive decision making. The paper itself, I won't go through all of the detail of it, but the paper itself also sets out, further to discussions that have previously taken place, the board's involvement in relation to regulatory decisions. So there have been some discussions about whether the board was of a mind to take a formal role in undertaking regulatory decisions, and the detail of that is set out at the bottom of page 3 and the top of page 4. And at paragraph 2.7 you'll see that on balance, further to discussions that Chair, yourself and David Behan have had, it is recommended to the board that the board should be kept informed by a weekly email about emerging regulatory issues, and regular reporting to the board, which we presently have, but which will be enhanced, about emerging or ongoing issues of particular risk or concern. what that will mean is that obviously the Chief Executive is already required to consult with the board on any issue or decision which is of significant effect on the organisation, and there are 4 bullet points at paragraph 2.7 setting out exactly the circumstances where that consultation should take place. So that's a recommendation for the board to consider today. At paragraph 2.8, you will see, board, that the chair took urgent action in relation to the financial delegations, and this was specifically taken to avoid criticism from our external auditors, who Mark has already identified are presently undertaking external audit activity. And the board is asked to approve that chair action. So that was singularly approving the financial delegations to ensure that there was an up-to-date financial delegation document for the organisation when that external audit activity commenced. At paragraph 2.8 in the paper on page 4, there is a proposal or a suggestion for your consideration today with regard to how the board may wish to remove some of the burden of considering governance documentation, for example, a governance framework, a scheme of delegation and other policies, by delegating to a further committee which could take the responsibility for considering such documents. If that committee were adopted, some of the responsibilities of the ARAC could transfer, which would leave ARAC to consider the detail of the audit activity and risk activity and less of the corporate governance work, but that's a matter for you to consider. Just also to note that clearly, because of the changes within the organisation, not only the changes to the executive team, but also moving forward when the organisation changes shape, the scheme of delegation will clearly need to be regularly updated. So I anticipate that there will Part 2, if you approve the set out of this scheme of delegation, Part 2 will need to be regularly updated to ensure that it is entirely up to date and that all are fully aware of their responsibilities and powers. So the recommendations to the board are set out on page 5 of 5, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Will the, in terms of the governance committee, will the terms of reference come to the board for approval? Because it would be kind of helpful just to understand what the committee will and will not do.
Absolutely, Kay. I would suggest that would be the case. If obviously bringing the suggestion to the board today was the first, the starting place for that, and obviously we would need to have some discussion with John with regard to the activities of the ARAC and which of those activities could helpfully move over to an alternative committee. But certainly the terms of reference I would propose should come back.
I mean, I have to say I agree that I think that the board probably shouldn't get involved in regulatory decisions, even if they are at a higher level. So I'm fine with that. I mean, I think that there's a bit of a wider issue in terms of how the board is kept up to date and also can provide some sort of challenge. And I think that's probably to do with the board development. But I'd like to move from a position of, not finding out things through a third party, for example. But as I said, I think hopefully that will improve once we start to develop the board.
Yeah, I think the paragraph 2.7 sort of makes sense. The bit I'm not sure about is this new committee, frankly. I mean, there are very few questions to which the answer is have a new committee. You know what I mean? Unless people want to argue very strongly for a new committee, I'd be inclined not to have it, actually. Do you want a committee? You want to do it? You could have a new committee if you want to. But I think, broadly speaking, this seems sensible to me. I mean, we need to have... To me, the distinction is that in terms of operational matters, we need to know what's going on, which I think is really Kay's point, not hear about it from somewhere else. And any way we can know whether the strategy is being implemented is we have the knowledge that it is. So, but we don't need to make those decisions. That should be done by the executive team. But we just need to have the knowledge. So I think this makes broad sense. I'm content with this, but I don't think we want a new governance committee. Please.
I'm not going to force you, I promise.
Could I support that? Both sections. I think the way that we've actually dealt with the system delegation was we sent it back and said, could you make it a bit more digestible? And I think this is a much better presentation of it, and I'm really pleased we've got it like this. I think the clarification in 2.7 is really welcome, and I think actually we are already seeing this sort of information coming through, and I think the board is much better informed. So it is going to be rare that we're going to be surprised by something that comes through on an email about action we've taken, because we're just much more up to date with stuff. So I think I'm hoping that the new governance committee would be A, very unnecessary, and B, probably not a wise decision, because we won't take the time to digest these sorts of issues here. We'll kick them off to that committee, and we would never have had this come back to us in this form if we hadn't have said, or if you hadn't have said, Chair, I haven't really got my head around the whole of this rather long document we had at the last meeting. So I think we've shown a way around it.
Absolutely, yes. Can I also confirm that the Chair's urgent action is agreed by the board? Super.
I did do something. I did it, but I did it because the auditors want me to do it, didn't they? Yeah, that's fine.
Yes. Thank you, Chair.
You see, I'm as the accounting officer, you see.
Excellent. Approval of board committee chairs. Louise, is that you as well?
It is me, yes, thank you. It should be a very quick paper, Chair. The board standing orders require that the chairs of the board committees be appointed at its first meeting of the financial year, holding office for the following year. So the purpose of this paper is just to set out the committees that applies to, and the chairs and the proposed chairs for those committees, and they're set out in paragraph 2 on page 3 of the paper itself.
Okay, everyone, that's ready for information, I think, mainly. Thank you. Anna, did you want to give us a quick verbal update on Health Watch?
So we've circulated a report. I'm sorry it was late. I guess the most interesting thing from my point of view is whether what's in this is of interest to you, and if so, which bits especially. I haven't got anything extra to add, David, so I'll take it as read, and please tell me whether or not you want something like this or something a bit different going forward, because this is the first time you've had a written one.
David, I thought this was very helpful, and a nice succinct summary report, so thank you to Anna for that. The only question I would raise is that I would certainly appreciate from Anna an update on the Health Watch in the development of Health Watch in the area where I live, and other board members may appreciate that as well outside this meeting. So if I can just make that request to Anna, that would be very helpful.
So one of the things that we do routinely when we go and see people is take their local Health Watch kind of picture with us, because that's what people want to know, and we haven't thought about it for the board, and we can absolutely do that. So unless anyone tells me otherwise, I'll assume that every board member would like to know about the Health Watch in their home space, and we will tell you what we know.
Okay. Steve?
I think the issue that Anna raises around the funding of local health watches is going to be very important, and I'm surprised you say the usual transparency. I thought you might be looking for a bit more transparency, because I think that we're already hearing rumours and nasty rumours of funding not going all the way through to Health Watch, and it's going to be a challenge in the present economic climate.
actually an update, really, Steve, on that, which is to say that I think even the most sceptical of commentators, particularly amongst perhaps some of the people who were previously involved in links, are acknowledging that actually what's happened more often than not is that more money is being made available for Local Health Watch than less. So there does actually seem to have been some advantage in the fact that the amount of money that should be passed through has not been mandated. Now, clearly some of that additional finance may relate to a need to spend a bit more in order to set up, and that certainly will be needed. So I don't know what the sort of routine revenue costs associated with Local Health Watch will be. None of us do, but actually the position on the whole seems to be extremely positive rather than negative, and Manchester seems to have been an outlier rather than the norm. So we will collect more information on this, so we're able to confirm that position as soon as we can. But at the moment, I would say actually to be reassured on this. Doesn't change the fact that I think in relation to the letter that I sent the Secretary of State, that the France's recommendation on funding was that he wanted to see something much more substantive, more like ring fencing. And I think he actually avoided that particular word. And I think we would find it helpful to know that all health watches had a minimum amount of money available to them rather than a maximum. I think it highly unlikely the government will agree to that recommendation because of the localism agenda. So I think we will be where we are. I'll know in a couple of weeks when I go to meet Jeremy Hunt for him to tell me what they're minded to say. But I expect them not to want to do that. And I think we will then have to keep abreast of how much money is available to Local Health Watch over the next period and see whether there are any issues that need to be addressed or not.
A couple of things. Are you providing input into the review on complaints by Tricia Hart and Anne Clwyd? Because I think there's an expectation that Health Watch will have a role to play in either signposting or supporting people to make complaints. And then the other thing was I wondered whether it would be a good idea, and I'd certainly welcome it, if the board and Health Watch England committee could sort of meet, either have a board to committee meeting or, it could be just informal. But I think I'd certainly value just seeing who, I know a number of the people, but I just thought it might be, helpful in terms of building bridges and having clarity on who does what and, that kind of thing.
So on the Anne Clwyd review, yes, we're also on the programme board or steering board or whatever it is that David was talking about earlier on, and so we are absolutely engaged with it, and also trying to bring Local Health Watch into that picture too. So yes, as you know, we're doing a much broader piece of work on complaints, which will look at not just hospitals, which of course is all that the Clwyd and Hart review is looking at. Very important and clearly some big issues there, but we're interested in the whole panoply of complaints processes. We had yesterday morning, in fact, a fantastic stakeholder roundtable, which we had the Ombudsman at and the Children's Commissioner and various other people talking about the first thoughts in relation to this project. So that work has begun, and you'll see more of it. Our first report on it will be published for our national conference of Health Watch. So that's only Health Watch people, but a national conference of Health Watch, which is on the 20th of June. And to go to your signposting point, part of that work, an early contribution really to the signposting, will be a digital decision tree, if you like, to which Local Health Watch can put on their websites and which consumers and users of services can use to help them work out where they should go, to whom they should go if they wish to raise complaints and concerns. And suffice to say that actually when you sketch it out, what's clear is that there are at least 5, if not 6 different systems, depending on whether you're in primary or secondary care, social care, or and whether you are NHS or local authority funded or self-funded or insured. So these are, it really is quite difficult to find your way through. Of course, that begs the question of whether your issue conveniently fits into one or other sector. So I think that will be an issue we'll want to pick up going forward. On the Board and Health Watch England Committee, I think we'd certainly welcome that. It's something that David and I can pick up and think about perhaps.
Thanks very much, Anna. I think it's for information. John, do you have anything you want to add on the ARAG?
No, I've written a relatively detailed report precisely, so I don't need to speak to it orally, but I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for John? No, thanks very much, John. Amanda, item 12.
Just very briefly, Chair, to say that the report commissioned by a previous board meeting and executive team discussion, I hope provides a synopsis of the cross-organisational efforts and hard work that went into delivering the inspection programme. It has given us some indicators where we need to focus our attention around the ongoing monitoring of performance and building in flexibility into the schedule, both of which have been implemented in this year's business plan. And just a thank you from me as chair of the programme board for the inspection programme to staff across all directorates who put in a tremendous effort.
Good, thanks very much, Amanda. Thank you. Board forward plan is attached. Everyone got that? Any other business? Nope. Well, I think we're closed. Lunchtime. Thank you.